I really took to the trees that were brought up last night, the image of water, like reflection in water, looking through the glass, and like what each of those things mean. Like I said, I know you want to protect it, but my experience of that was like with the trees, the growth of the character based off of the bookends of the film and the reflection because of the reflective nature of the story, and also the glass, or looking through the glass because it allowed to create this feeling of unease throughout the film, of images being distorted. So am I somewhat there, or am I just grasping at straws?
I mean, when you say like all the vines and you're talking about like in his bedroom as well, he had the imagery in his
Well, even like the transition of the macro lens on the eyelashes and how that kind of resembles the structure that's in the film.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's well, for one, it's amazing that you are actually kind of putting all these little different bits and pieces together. I mean, some of them maybe there are probably kind of accidental, but I mean, some of them are. There is a very reflective nature in the movie. But I mean, yeah, I mean, you seem like you've got something in your mind that you're kind of going towards, which this is the first time anyone's ever spoken to me about this film. I think you're the first person who's interviewed me, so that's like amazing that you're seeing all these bits and pieces that are going on. I mean, yeah, like I said sort of in the Q&A, I don't really want to give too much away.
Sure. Well, it gives me a lot to think about. So what do you think contributed to how deep thinking you are with finding these extensions of the theme in such a visual way like you do?
Well, I've always really loved dreams and kind of subconscious ideas, and maybe sort of a bit like I do like to try and work as, like I always kind of think if I'm making something, I'm not really, often don't try and consciously think too much. So, when I'm writing, it's very much like there's not a lot of conscious thought going on. I'm kind of just letting it all kind of come to my head, and then especially so for like this movie, I did it all in Unreal first. It's like a computer game kind of software, but architects can use it, filmmakers can use it, can do really high-end VFX. I basically made a cheap Toy Story movie first of the film, which I actually motion captured myself on my phone, and so I performed all the parts, and then because I scored the film as well, and then kind of scored to that. So I definitely have like quite a precise, clear image that I'm kind of running for. But when I'm doing it, I'm very dreamlike when I'm trying to come up with does that make sense? Like I'm very accurate about what I'm doing, but I'm kind of letting my head go when I come up with it.
I actually was going to ask you about how calculated because you are with your storytelling, because throughout it, like I don't know how any other way to really explain it other than like there's some sort of like terror frequency meter or something like there without throughout the film, when you're depending on how much time we're sitting in a space, or the way that you go back and forth between images, or the sound landscape of it all. But are you thinking about that going into it? I guess you spoke that you let it kind of, you go into it calculated, but then you let the organic process kind of take over whenever it needs to.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, I don't know whether I'm fully going to answer your question. I mean, I think it's all like, I'm very much into atmosphere and rhythm. Like you can make a rhythm just through editing. Like if you look at a film like Exorcist, it's got no music. It's all sound design, and the rhythm of how that film feels. Even with something like Alien as well, or and also like a big influence for this film is like Under the Skin,
Sure.
Where it's just got that. It's all about atmosphere and rhythm and just moving the audience around, and so that sort of stuff I'm very I do. I edited the movie myself, and you can imagine what I'm doing if I'm editing it and I'm scoring it myself. I'm trying so many different versions of how I want to just move everyone along, and like this film was definitely probably a balance of, which the producers helped me with massively. They really, I didn't do all this alone. My producers were all over it and kind of being my eyes outside my head, which is just trying to always kind of keep the pace moving, but yet it's not a slow film, but it's not, do you know what I mean? Like you're moving along it at the right pace, but I'm giving you time to sort of fall into the world, and I'm not trying to put too much of a veneer between you. I'm not trying to like constantly put in music or cues to kind of tell you something. I'm like, I just want you to sort of sit in it a bit. So yeah.
I mean, that's why I spoke to like looking through the glass and that kind of, it's like jazz music or something. Like there's just a rhythm to it, I guess, as you described. But how do you factor humor into it? Because I don't know if you actually sat down and watched it with the audience, but there's a moment in the film, and I don't really want to spoil all of what happens in it, but it just involves something very intense happening, and then a character has to go to bed right after, and then the whole audience laughed because we have with horror, there's so many moments where somebody, because we're constantly like, don't do that, that's not how human nature is, or how we would, but we're also watching it as knowing that it's a horror film, so there's that, but then it unfolds in a very natural way of what follows it. But was that designed as a humorous moment?
No, I mean actually there's loads of bits in that film. People laugh. So when I did my final test screening, was it my final? No, my first ever cast and crew locked showing of the film, and there was some laughter now and again, and I kind of came out and was like, and someone came up to me and was like, no, we're like tense. Can I swear on this?
Yes.
Right. We're like, no, we're tense as like I'm like relieving myself. Relieving myself sounds terrible. Yeah. Well, there you go. And so last night, whenever that was happening, because I knew what that was then, I'd never really thought about it properly. When there's all that, I mean, there was quite a bit of it last night. People just sort of going and like laughing, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
Well, it's because we're clinching, and we're trying to unclench, find anything to grasp onto. So any just inkling of something that could potentially be funny, we'll let it out. Yeah. Even when Isaac's talking about Laura's cooking, I thought was quite funny too.
Yeah, great. I mean, I did a comedy film beforehand, so I was a comedy guy, but had no intention really much of any of that stuff. Yeah.
Do you think? Have you had a conversation with Charles? Is that his name? The guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Plays Daddy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you had a conversation with him about the journey that he's going to have after this with smiling?
No. But he's gonna love it. I mean, he was so sweet, bless him, when he finally saw the finished version. I mean, he's he was so kind, and he was actually the one guy when I came out a bit nervous, sort of like, I hope this is working, and he was like, took me to one side and was like, Ben, like, I'm so proud of this, well done, and he's a really lovely guy. So and I'm sure he will be the first person to absolutely be loving people either coming up to him and pulling faces at him or asking him to do it. So yeah.
And I'll cut you loose on asking about the aspect that you are most proud of, since you mentioned being proud there.
That it's worked. I mean, that it's worked, right? I mean, just to give you a little thing, like I've arrived in Austin. I made that film on my laptop at home in my little attic room. Obviously I had some crew and people helping, big collaboration, but really it was like 7 months of that. I lock it. It's been gone for 6 months. I arrive in Austin and people have been coming up to me going like, Ben Barfoot, Daddy's Head, and I'm like, oh hi. So this film for me has been, it's been just such a joy. And the aspect that I'm really proud of is that I've managed to mix two of the components that I've always been trying to mix, which have been slightly in conflict with each other, which I sometimes call like the boy and the man. There's like one part of me that just wants to make cinematic, cool imagery stuff, just reference movies that I love and things like that. And there's the other side of me that's always about personal story, and it's about how I feel about the world, and I want to make something that resembles what I'm thinking about. And I always found those two things at conflict all the time. And actually this was not the first time now, but it was like I really got a chance to put the two together, and it all came together naturally in a bit of a dreamlike way, and then it's worked, and I'm like, wow, okay, amazing.